Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on the place of the world you are. Welcome to a new podcast with a coffee with Kevin. And today I came to Phoenix, Arizona. It's hot here, but it's okay. I like it very much. And why? Because I have a good friend here in the university, but she will tell you it's Hannah Creviston. We will talk today about music, memory, and resistance during the Holocaust. It's an important feature, and she will tell us many things that most of us don't know. So, welcome to the show, Hannah. And
Thank
which
you.
is the university? Say it again, please.
So I teach at Arizona State University. I'm on the piano faculty here.
Okay, well, thank you very much for coming here to the show, and because this is not just a story about music. It's a story about memory. It's a story about resistance and the legacy of voices silenced too soon. They were very young. So we will start first of all with their personal start, legacy and listening. So, can you introduce us in the connection between the Holocaust and the inspiration behind this project?
So I grew up in a Jewish family. We learn about the Holocaust. I've always been interested in reading stories about uh, people who were killed and people who survived and how the Jewish people have lived through and persevered. Um, and it's always been part of my identity. Um, but I've always been a musician. I started playing piano when I was 6 years old, and I always knew that that's what I wanted to do. Uh, and then back in 2019, Ava Schloss came and spoke here in Arizona, and she's a Holocaust survivor. She's the posthumous sister, a stepsister, excuse me, of Anne Frank. And I went to hear her because I was very interested in hearing her story, but also I was kind of at this point in my life where I was, what difference am I making in the world? What is my purpose? I'm teaching piano lessons. Am I really doing anything to make the world a better place? Um, and one of the things she said in sharing her story was that she remembered hearing her brother ask their father, what happens when people die? And her father said, well, they live on, their legacy lives on through their children. And her brother asked, what happens if people die and they don't have children? And her father said, well, they live on through their works and the things that they've done and how they've affected people and the things that they've left behind. Uh, and so I just started thinking, and it was a very kind of slow, gradual process. I went to the rabbi here at our JCC, and I said, I have this idea. Do you think anyone would be interested? I want to research uh, stories and music from that we've lost in the Holocaust. And he said, absolutely. And so that he was kind of the encouragement. And so I started doing this and putting this project together.
Well, from these words, I am very, I would say, amazed and surprised because you're establishing a connection with those composers that were not just victims, they were creators, they were resisting, and they were thinking, and they were composing. So, I mean, there's a lot to say about this one. And then we will go deeper, and we will talk about what you have found about music and resistance and how you create under oppression and in places where everything is being distracted, bombs and ghettos, and there's a lot about this one. So how can you put the human spirit, the music, and then also resisting? So let's talk about, let's make a brief context. Terezin as a model ghetto used by the Nazis for propaganda. Tell us a little, what you have found about that.
So Terezin was a very interesting place because it it was a concentration camp, but it was not a death camp. It was constructed by the Nazis to be this kind of, as you said, this model ghetto, and it was a place where many artists, musicians, poets, philosophers, writers were taken, and the Nazis used this to as propaganda to show that they were quote unquote treating Jews humanely. This is where, when the International Red Cross did their visit, this is where they took them in 1944. They brought them to Terezin to show, oh, music and art are thriving here. It's really not as bad as what you think. And you know, it was still a forced labor camp. They were forced to do very difficult labor during the day. 33,000 people, over 33,000 people died from starvation and disease. But it was looked at from the outside as a place of still a cultural development center. And the Nazis used that to their advantage. In reality, it was kind of a stopping point. It was, most of the people who came to Terezin were then deported to death camps from Terezin. But it was a place where art thrived in spite of the horrific circumstances that were happening there.
So, how can what we can think about the connection between these people and today? What is happening, and how you can resemble this one?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question and thought, and it's what I'm still thinking about and still striving. Um, there's a quote.
Because, excuse me, because art was survival, and
Right.
it was survival because that's a spiritual resistance, and that, I think that this is a kind of the final testimony at those times.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a quote. I won't say it exactly, but there's a quote by James Conlon, who's the founder of the Orel Foundation, which is kind of the big umbrella organization for the revival and performance of these works. Um, and he says something to the effect of, by keeping this music alive, we deny the Nazis a victory. We keep their spirit going. We keep the spirit of the Jewish people alive, and I think that's relevant to today, by keeping the stories of those murdered, those who's being held hostage, those who are being censored. By keeping those stories alive, we deny any sort of victory to the oppressors.
That's it. I think that's the connection for today. And let me go deeper in this idea. I would like to talk about the story about the different people there. Let me
Okay.
go to some composers. Gideon Klein. He
Okay.
was a brilliant Czech pianist and composer, and he died at 25, age 25, very young. A mind filled with promise, but silenced too soon. Uh, what did you find in Gideon Klein?
So there are some quotes from several survivors saying that if he had lived past the age of 25, he would be a household name. He was that talented. He showed that much promise. He was studying in Prague when the Nazis came and occupied Czechoslovakia. And one of the first things they did was they closed down all of the academies, universities, and they banned music by Jewish musicians and composers. And he managed to continue having his works played for a little while by using an alias, a fake name. Um, And he was actually offered a scholarship to study in London at the Royal Academy of Music there. But unfortunately, it was already too late for Jews to be allowed to travel, so he couldn't leave. He was one of the most active composers in Terezin. He performed solo piano recitals regularly. We'll talk about the children of Terezin later, but there's a poem by one of the children that they wrote after seeing one of his concerts. He composed many songs, string quartets, piano sonata that I've played. And his music survived because he gave, when he was about to be deported, he gave his scores to his girlfriend, who was also in Terezin there, and she survived and gave the manuscripts to his sister, who also survived. And the thing I think is really fascinating about Gideon Klein is until very recently, we didn't know about his music before that time. And then it was only in 1990 that suitcases full of his music were found in the home of a family friend in Prague. And they included other songs, more string quartets, some wind music, and things like that. So he really had a brilliant output of music for such a young composer.
Wow. Let me go to another one. Another person, Pavel Haas. Um, he was, studying for strings, was featured in a Nazi propaganda film. And he, not there, he was murdered in Auschwitz. There's also a lot of things that you can talk about Pavel.
Yeah, so Pavel was, again, also very active. He was more active in the film and music circle because his brother was a Czech film star. He was very active in the theater and film circles, and so he was writing music for his brother and the stage. Um, a very interesting, as you read about these composers and learn about them, it's very important to remember that they were people, right? Just like you and I are people, and they made decisions, sometimes good decisions, sometimes bad decisions, right?
Yeah.
But one of the amazing decisions that Pavel Haas made, he was married to a woman who was not Jewish, and as the
Okay.
Nazis were coming to power, he divorced her so that she would not be arrested and deported. Um, and so when he came to Terezin, he was very depressed. He'd gone through all of this. He divorced his wife, and it was actually Gideon Klein who encouraged him to continue writing. He wrote the Study for Strings, which was conducted by a man named Karl Ansel, who survived the Holocaust. As you said, it was featured in this propaganda film. And after the war, Karl Ansel went back to the camp and found all of the parts for the Study for Strings, except for one part. He couldn't find the double bass part. And so a friend, a mutual friend of theirs who had survived, kind of recreated what the double bass part would have sounded like. So it's, some of the music was never performed, some of it was lost, and so it's kind of piecing together through so many people who have this interest in bringing life to this music.
Amazing. Let me go to number three.
Sure.
Rudolf Carroll. He was not Jewish, and he was in prison because he was resisting. And amazing thing, he wrote music on a toilet paper while he was in jail. Uh, what is the main thing about Rudolf?
I mean, the thing that sticks out most to me is the fact that he
Yeah.
was not Jewish, right? So few people stood up, right? Less than 2%, we think that were, you're talking about connection to today also. So those who are not Jewish and who stands, it's very important and very meaningful. Um, Again, he wrote some really, really beautiful music. He studied with Dvorak. So if anybody is a music lover, that's a name that you know. He was one of the last students to study with Anthony Dvorak. Um, he had a kind of a almost like a mystery novel kind of life. He and his wife were on vacation in Russia during the start of World War I. He was arrested for allegedly being an Austrian spy. He escaped and managed to travel as a music teacher in Russia. Then he escaped to Siberia and conducted a military orchestra, and then made his way back to Prague. Um, he taught at the Prague Conservatory for a very long time. As you said, he joined the underground Czech resistance until he was arrested. There are many stories of him that he was tortured. Of course, we're sure that happened, right? And he refused to give up names of other resistance workers. He was sent to a political prison first, and then to Terezin. And yeah, the the amount of creativity that still thrived in these horrible conditions. He's writing music on toilet paper. He wrote an opera on toilet paper. He wrote this. It's called Nanette. Um, it's a combination of string and wind instruments, nine and on toilet paper that he managed to smuggle out.
So
And
we
so
can see here that creativity is everywhere. I mean, you cannot have the enough of neither funds, neither a piece of paper. But when you are creative, you can find a piece of toilet paper and you can write opera. Let me go to number four, and we will talk about five or six, whatever. Anyway, we're talking about just a small list of composers. And you talk about 30, more than 33,000. So we can imagine the creativity that we found in Terezin. Erwin Schulhoff, jazz. He's connected with jazz. And he died of tuberculosis in captivity. Uh, and he has an eclectic voice. Uh, so this is important about Erwin. What about Erwin? What can you tell us about Erwin?
so he's definitely the most well known of these composers. He has probably the largest output, strings, piano, songs, wind, and much of it is still performed today. Um, I mentioned that these are all just people, and he it sounds like he was a very interesting person. Um, he studied with Debussy for a little while. Apparently, that didn't last because they both had very strong personalities and didn't get along very well. He was in a musical circle with, again, these are maybe not household names, but these are very well known names in musical circles: Schoenberg, Berg, Webern. He would
Yes.
create concerts promoting their music with his music and other local composers. Um, he was very, very forward thinking. He was one of the first composers to combine classical music and jazz music. He was interested in how music reflected the Dada movement. And he, there's another, again, not a household name, but if you're into music, John Cage is a composer that some people know and we think of as very avant-garde, very pushing the envelope. And he wrote a piece called 4 minutes and 33 seconds in 1952, and it's 4 minutes and 33 seconds of silence. And the point is that all around you is music if you know how to listen. And we think of this piece, John Cage's piece, as very revolutionary. But Schulhoff, 33 years before that, wrote a piece called In Futurum, where if you look at the score, it's very heavily marked, and he wrote a lot of musical details into the score. It's all silence.
Well,
Yeah, so he was so revolutionary. He actually said, "Art is revolution." He has a quote where he was writing a letter to Alban Berg, and he said, "Art is revolution." Um, he loved to go out partying. He loved jazz nightclubs. He loved music. and he was just an amazing composer. The thing that's unique about him is he was actually not sent to Terezin. He tried to escape with his family and was not able to. He applied for Soviet citizenship, which he received, and 2 days after he picked up their visas to emigrate to the Soviet Union, he was arrested for being a Soviet citizen, and so he was his father was sent to Terezin, but he was not. And as you said, he died of tuberculosis 2 months later.
Wow. Well, I have left at number five because he was the only survivor among all these featured composers and real heroes. Karl Berman. He continued composing, performing, and this shows that is a proof of that legacy in years. And can you tell us some details about Karl?
Sure. So he was what I would consider a very well-rounded musician, as they all were. But I mean, he was a pianist, he was a composer, he was a conductor, he was a singer. Um, he was he was part of you talk about art as resistance. There's another composer that we're not really talking about today, but Victor Ullmann is another one of these composers who wrote um, an opera that was rehearsed in Terezin, and Karl Berman was going to be singing in it. And this opera was shut down by the Nazis because it was called Death of an Emperor, and it was it portrayed Hitler, and the Nazis realized that, and it was about overcoming. So he was very active in Terezin, in singing. Um, there was a choir there in Terezin that performed for the other prisoners there. He was sent to Auschwitz, and he then was sent to a subcamp of Dachau, and he almost died. Um, and But he managed to survive, and he went on to teach at the Prague Conservatory. He was one of the leading composers of the Prague National Theatre. He performed and directed in opera houses all around the world. He just died in 1995, and so he has a beautiful piano suite that I love playing. It's just the way that he, as a composer, is able to really create music to show what he experienced is really powerful.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, that's kind of a two walls because it's
Yeah.
amazing. Children, because families were moved over to Terezin, and the innocence and the creativity in this, we need to think about this world of cruelty and what was happening there. What can you tell us about the children in Terezin? There's a lot of all that.
Well, so there were over 15,000 children imprisoned in Terezin, and as a mother of two young children, I can't even fathom, it's horrific enough for adults, but for children to go through this. Um, and so there's uh, a collection. I think every Jew knows "I Never Saw Another Butterfly." Right? There's this collection of children's poems and paintings,
Yeah.
and there are actually several beautiful settings now of some of these poems, and there's a beautiful quote at the beginning, and I wrote it down. I hope you don't mind if I just read this quote because I don't want to mess it up. It's so beautiful in the
Yes.
preface to this. It says, "Through their artistic expressions, the voices of these children, each one unique and individual, reach us across the abyss of the greatest crime in human history, allow us to touch them, and restore our own humanity in doing so." I get goosebumps every time I
Oh,
read it. It's so
it
powerful.
is.
Just, I mean, yeah. So it was,
So I mean, we can see that those days in Terezin, big composers as well as as children, they were also creating things. They were telling stories. They were making drawings. They were writing poems. I mean, there's a lot of things that were happening during the Holocaust in this Terezin. But let me go on because time is flying, and it has been a wonderful time. And why this matters? Music, memory, and moral imagination. I can think while we were talking about this one, I can think if all of these people were surviving, the world just because of listening to their compositions or looking their drawings should be very different. So there's a role of artists, educators, and listeners in preserving this memory. There's a lot of talk about this one, no?
Yeah, I mean, this is a whole other podcast. This topic of, um, there's the current world we live in. There's there's a rise in anti-Semitism. Uh, there are fewer Holocaust survivors. Right, we're losing Holocaust survivors, and we're gaining Holocaust deniers. Right, who say it didn't happen, it's not true. And I think this idea, not only is art resistance, not only is art revolution, but art art helps us preserve the memory. It helps us to give voice to their legacy. It helps us to learn from what happened. And I think, as a teacher myself, it's so important for me to give voice to those who lost their voice, or they didn't lose it, they had it taken from them. Right? They and it's art is and music are meant to not only to challenge the viewer or the listener, but it's also meant to bring us together, right? And to create a sense of community, a sense of belonging, a sense of togetherness. And I think in that way, it's really interesting to go through the wide array. It's not just that all of these composers were Jewish and were killed in Terezin or survived Terezin or the Holocaust. They were each individual people who had their own styles, they had their own lives, they had their own, each person is a world, right? They each had their own voice, their own story, their own legacy. And so I'm really just trying to do what I can
You're doing a lot.
to educate.
You're doing a lot because with all this research and with all this, what you have found about Terezin and all about these people, you are doing a lot. And also, I would like to make a call on teachers, performers, and students, to carry the torch. We need to. I mean, the Holocaust survivors, are dying, so we need to bring this torch or their torch to the next generation and to the next generation. So I would like to call on teachers and performers, perform these words, share these stories, keep this music alive. Because if we can keep this music alive, we are passing the torch to the next generation and to the next generation. And everything was fantastic at those times while they were composing, not what was happening in Terezin. But at least we need to, pass the torch. Hannah, thank you very much for being here at My Coffee with Kevin. It was a pleasure for the viewers, for the listeners, to have you here. And I would like to invite all the people that is watching this episode of Coffee with Kevin about the music during the Holocaust to watch the next show. It will be as interesting as this one. And Hannah, again, thank you very much, and see you in the next Coffee with Kevin. Goodbye now.
Thank you.
Thank you.